When you say employer-sponsored visa, what does it mean?
So there are three types of employer-sponsored visas. So subclass 482, which is a skills in demand visa, subclass 186, which is an employer nomination scheme, and subclass 494, which is a regional employer nominated visa.
I have heard maximum about visa subclass 482. I want to apply for this visa. How can I do that and what are the requirements? Have you seen people get this employer-sponsored visas from offshore? Subclass 186. As you mentioned, it's a permanent residency visa. What are the eligibility requirements to apply for subclass 186? As a business, what level do I need to be in order to be an eligible sponsor? What are some of the reasons why these employer-sponsored visas can be rejected? What's up, people? This is part 2 of our migration videos where we ask registered migration agent to explain us simply what are these visa subclass, and today's focus is on employer sponsored visa. So thank you for doing this, Kunal. I'm excited to just dive into all these employer sponsored visas.
Hi Dev. Yeah, thank you for inviting me again. It's good to be here and talking about employer-sponsored visas. It's an interesting topic currently. For the last 2-3 years, there have been some amazing developments in the visa program from the Department of Home Affairs. So yeah, I'm excited.
Let's dive into it and start with basics. So, when you say employer sponsored visa, what does it mean?
So employer-sponsored visa is basically to explain you in a very simple way. When an employer is looking to fill the skills gap and they have a suitable candidate with the required qualification and the skills to do that job, they can nominate that candidate and the candidate can basically get a visa for a temporary period, 2 years or 4 years, and they can come and work in that particular company. Okay. So if I have a company, I'm looking to hire someone. So I can basically use this visa program to fill the gap in my company and sponsor someone to come and work in my company.
Okay, and is it just temporary or it could be permanent as well?
It can be permanent as well. So there are three types of employer sponsored visas. So subclass 482, which is a skills in demand visa, subclass 186, which is an employer nomination scheme, and subclass 494, which is a regional employer nominated visa.
Okay, I have heard a lot that Australian government is like, we need to get a lot more skilled people, and Australian government is favoring employer sponsored visas. Is that true? And if it is, how can that be true?
Yes, it is true. As I said, in the last 2-3 years, the Department of Home Affairs is focusing on the employer nominated visas. So if we talk about the numbers in 2023-2024, 36,000 seats were allocated to employer-sponsored visas, which was increased to 44,000 for 2024 and 2025. Okay. So which is approximately 22% increase in the number of seats. Wow. So yes, they are focusing and they are motivating employers across Australia. If they are looking to fill the skills gap, they can look for talent under this visa program, nominate people and call them to Australia to work in the specific field.
Okay, so this visa is for people abroad as well and people who don't have permanent residency in Australia.
Yes, an employer can basically nominate a candidate who is already in Australia, or if they are looking to nominate a candidate who's offshore, overseas, they can do that under these visa programs.
Perfect. And I've heard maximum about visa subclass 482. Okay, so let's talk about it. I want to apply for this visa. How can I do that and what are the requirements?
Okay, so to understand 482, so 482 is skills in demand visa. Initially, before 7th of December, the name of this visa program was temporary skill shortage visa. but due to the recent changes, the name has been changed. The subclass is still the same. So there are three streams into the 482 visa: core skill stream, specialist skill stream, and labor agreement stream. So if you are looking to apply for a 482 visa, first you need an employer who's looking to sponsor you. The employer has to be an eligible sponsor. So if the employer is not an eligible sponsor, there is an application which is called a standard business sponsor. We have to apply for that. We have to make the sponsor an eligible sponsor. They have a registered business. They have been doing their business activities lawfully in Australia. There is no adverse information about the specific business. You should have the minimum qualification requirements and the work experience requirements. Now, initially the work experience requirement for a 482 visa was 2 years, which was reduced to 1 year after 7th of December. So even if you have 1 year of full-time experience, it can be on a pro rata basis. If you have part-time or casual work experience as well, that can be counted, but it has to be in the last 5 years.
Right.
You should be getting paid on a TISMIT level, so annual market salary, which is currently 73,150. So if you're getting paid that, you have the minimum qualification, you have the skills required to do the job, there is a genuine need of your position in that particular company, you can be nominated under a 482 visa.
Okay, and do I need skill assessment done in order to apply for 482?
Now that's an interesting question. For a 482 visa, skill assessment requirement is not mandatory. Now there are certain there are certain occupation which do not come into this category. They need a skill assessment as per the requirement, but majority of the occupations under 482 don't require a skill assessment.
Got it. And as you mentioned that now work experience is just 1 year. Now, can this work experience be during my studies, or can this be, let's say, before I started masters in offshore? Can that experience be counted as well?
So, yes, the work experience attained overseas can be also counted towards the minimum requirement, which is 1 year. If you have completed your work experience during your studies, as I said, part-time or casual work experience can also be counted, but the work experience has to be attained in the last 5 years.
Right.
That is the requirement. But if you have attained work experience in the last 5 years, even if it is in Australia or outside Australia, it can be counted towards the requirements.
Okay. And I don't know if my occupation is on this list or not. And let's say if it is not on the list, then can I apply for visa 482?
Now 482, as I previously mentioned, that there were some recent changes which happened on 7th of December. There was a new occupation list which was introduced by the Department of Home Affairs, which is CSOL. 456 occupations have been added in this CSOL. Under this occupation list, if the candidate have an occupation under CSOL, they can be sponsored under the 482 visa program and the 186 employer nomination scheme as well. Now, as you asked that if you don't have an occupation which is falling under the CSOL list, then you will have to look for alternative pathways. You can always go for a general skill migration, point tested visas like subclass 189, 190, 491. But yeah, after the 7th of December, if you're looking to be nominated under the 482 visa or the 186 visa, your occupation has to be on the CSOL list.
Okay. And let's just take my example only. This is hypothetical example. Let's say I got 482 visa.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm working with a company and I got the visa for 2 years.
Yeah.
After a year, I want to leave the company. So do I need another company to sponsor me to stay in the country? Or like in the US, if you don't have a job and you are on H1B, in like 90 days you have to leave the country.
Okay.
So how does that work in Australia?
So that's actually a very interesting point. Initially, there was a period of 90 days, which was given to you by Department of Home Affairs.
Right.
If you are not working with the same employer, you are given that period to look for another employer, but another employer also has to do a nomination for you under that specific occupation.
Okay.
Now, if you, after the 1st of July 2024, this requirement was increased to 180 days.
Right.
So now, if you, for some instance, you are not working in the company, you are not in the position, the business is liquidating, or they don't need you to be working in that position, you are given 180 days to find a new employer. Now, that new employer also has to nominate you under 482.
Okay.
Because if you're looking to apply for a permanent residency 186 visa through a TRT stream, which is a transition stream from 482 to 186, you have to meet the eligibility requirement 2 years of work experience in your nominated occupation on a 482 visa. It has to be in that position only. It can be with multiple sponsors.
Right.
It's not like you need only one employer. It can be with multiple employers, but you need to prove 2 years of work experience so that you can transition from a 482 to a 186 visa.
That's a brilliant transition in this podcast because I want to discuss about 186 because as you mentioned, it's a permanent residency visa.
Yes.
Right? But before we get into it, if you guys have any questions, write that in the comment section so that we can ask Kunal, and follow-up video, he'll answer all those questions for us and we'll get those answers. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell because we will keep coming up with amazing videos. Okay, moving on to subclass 186. As you mentioned, it's a permanent residency visa. What are the eligibility requirements to apply for subclass 186?
So subclass 186, as the name suggests, employer nomination scheme. It's a direct permanent residency based on employer sponsored visa. So subclass 186 as subclass 482 has 3 streams. You can transition from a 482 to a 186. You can apply for a direct entry stream for a 186. So in terms of minimum eligibility criteria, employer has to be an eligible sponsor. Yes. Employer does not need an SPS for a subclass 186 when comparing it to a 482. You should have a minimum 3 years of work experience criteria. You should have a mandatory skill assessment for 186. So for 482, as I said, skill assessment is not a mandatory criteria, but for 186, if you're applying under the direct entry stream, you need a skills assessment and you need a minimum of 3 years of full-time work experience to be eligible for a 186 visa. You should be paid an annual market salary of 73,150 minimum. For different occupations, it can be on a different salary level as well. So if I talk about a general practitioner, in Australia, their minimum salary is more than $100,000.
Right.
So if a general practitioner is paid 73,000 or 74,000, their nomination can be rejected. Because the minimum salary requirement for a general practitioner in their field is more than $100,000.
Right.
So different occupations have different requirement, but if you see on a minimum level, annual market salary, 3 years of work experience, mandatory skill assessment is required. You need to meet your English language requirements. Age requirement is also there for 186. You have to be under the age of 45 to be nominated under the 186 direct entry stream.
Okay. And is there a bifurcation that the Australian government will give these many 482 visas, these many 186 visas and 494 visas?
No, they directly come under the employer nominated visas. So as I said previously, the number has been already allocated. So the government has already allocated 44,000 seats for 482 and 186 and employer nominated schemes. So there is no bifurcation that they are going to give certain number of 186, certain number of 482s, unless there are seats available and they are they are not already allocated. Candidates can be sponsored under these employer nominated schemes.
What are some of the occupations that you have seen people get sponsored under any of these visas?
So as per my experience, the most favorable industry that I have seen people being nominated is hospitality industry. Now, as you know, that Australia has a skill shortage in terms of people working in the hospitality industry, and specifically post COVID, the employers were facing a lot of problem looking for talents under the sector. Hospitality industry is one of the sectors. Um, Computer science, information technology, IT industry, so technical industry has also been supported with this employer nominated schemes. There are other major critical industries as well, like health, mining, agriculture, where in regional areas people are needed, and the employers are actually facing a lot of problem in getting and hiring the right kind of talent. So employer nominated scheme actually helps those industries to go out and look for appropriate candidates who can work for them, and they can actually meet the skills and the qualification requirements. They don't have to wait for the point tested visas.
Right.
So that is the main difference, that you can get a result under the employer nomination scheme much faster compared to the point tested visas.
Right. Okay. And have you seen people get this employer-sponsored visas from offshore? So they have never studied in Australia, never put a foot in Australia, but they are finding employers, applying for jobs. Have you seen them get these visas as well?
Yes, definitely. As I said, that employers can nominate the right candidate even if they are in Australia or outside Australia. And this has been a really good visa program for people who are looking to migrate to Australia, but they don't want to go with a study pathway, a traditional study pathway, then a work visa, and then a permanent residency. I've seen many candidates in accounting positions, taxation position, auditors, even construction project managers, hospitality industry, they have been sponsored. Recently, I came across a candidate who's a physiotherapist.
Okay.
Just at the age of 26, he was sponsored with the help of a Queensland employer, and he had the right qualification and the skills as well, and he got the registration through the relevant assessment authority as well, and he was sponsored as a physiotherapist, and he directly got an opportunity to come and work in Australia for a period of 4 years.
Right. Okay. And while they are on this 482 visa for 4 years, they can figure out if they want to stay in Australia, what their pathway is going to be. And then either they can go for point tested visas or they can apply for 186 depending on the employer.
Yes. So 482 is not a permanent residency.
Okay.
482 is basically a work visa which is allowing you to come and work in Australia for a period of 2 years or maximum 4 years.
Right.
But as I said previously as well, 482 has a permanent residency pathway. So the candidate can figure out after coming to Australia, they want to try for a point tested visa, or if they have a suitable employer and the employer is ready to sponsor them for 186, they can directly apply for a 186 as well after they meet the minimum requirements for the 186 direct and transition stream.
Okay. And initial part of the podcast, you mentioned about 494 visa, and then you also mentioned a lot of regional employers are looking for talent.
Yes.
So what is this 494 visa and what is the eligibility?
So 494 visa was introduced specifically to help the regional employers. So in terms of designated regional areas, if employers are located in Canberra, in Adelaide, in Perth, and they are looking to hire appropriate talent, and they want people to come and work for their company, so they can nominate candidates under the 494 visa. Now 494 also has a permanent residency pathway. After 494, you have been on a 494 for 3 years, you can transition from a 494 to a 191 visa. So similar like 491,
Yeah.
491 people can apply for a 191. 494 candidates can also apply for a 191 visa after they have completed 3 years of their employment and they have been in that regional area for that specific period of time. But for 494 as well, the minimum work experience requirement like 186 is 3 years.
Okay.
You need a mandatory skill assessment
Okay.
for a 494, and your employer has to basically take an approval from that regional migration authority.
Right.
So for example, the employer is based in Canberra. They have to take an approval from the Canberra migration to basically sponsor that candidate for the 494 visa.
Okay, so let's talk about businesses. As a business, what level do I need to be in order to be an eligible sponsor?
Now, that's actually a really good question, and many of the employers and the candidates come to us with this question because they're really confused. You know, what kind of employer do I need? What is the requirement of an employer? So, employer has to have a registered business for the last 12 months at least. They should be operating legally. Their business activities obviously have to be lawful in Australia. There should be no adverse information against the business or against the sponsoring employer. They have for certain employer sponsored, as I said, you need an SBS, standard business sponsorship. If you have that SBS, the SBS is valid for 5 years. You can sponsor under 482 and 494 if you have an SBS. So you should have a genuine need of that position.
Okay.
You as an employer, you should be able to justify to the government or Department of Home Affairs that I am facing problems in hiring local talent.
Okay.
I'm not getting the right kind of candidate to work in that particular nominated position, and that is the reason I'm going out and looking for international candidates, international migrants who are in Australia or outside Australia to fill that position.
Okay.
Because employers nowadays are facing a lot of problem in getting the right kind of candidate.
Right.
And this visa programs are actually helping them to fill that gap. And
Okay.
it is helping the migrants as well to basically migrate to Australia.
Okay, so let's say there is a startup, just been operating for 12 months, doesn't have any revenue. Can they sponsor people under these subclasses?
Now it is case to case basis. Obviously, we will have to justify the need of the position in the business. Their financials also are very important. So if there's a startup and there's no revenue, then it can be a little complicated in terms of justification to the Department of Home Affairs. Now there are some critical industries which have labor agreement.
Okay.
So every employer nominated has a labor agreement stream as well.
Okay.
Now in terms of labor agreements, you need to see that specific industry. For an example, aged care industry. Aged care industry has a labor agreement with Department of Home Affairs.
Okay.
Now there are certain exemptions for employer and for candidates as well. If you're not being paid at a minimum annual market salary, you can be still sponsored.
Okay.
If your employer is not meeting certain criteria, but they are in that specific industry, they have a labor agreement with the government, then also they can sponsor the specific person. Okay. So it depends on which industry you're working, where are you located, are there certain exemptions for you as an employer. The government has certain programs and they have made certain guidelines to make it easy for the employer to nominate certain occupations and certain people under that occupations.
Okay, but just in general, if you had to list few things that makes employer eligible to sponsor, what would that be?
You should have a registered business. You should be eligible to sponsor. So basically an SBS application. You should have a genuine need of that position. You should have good financial stability in terms of as a business operation, so that you can prove that you can pay that market salary to the particular person. Right. Because if there is a small scale or a medium scale company and they don't have that kind of revenue, it's very difficult for them to justify to Department of Home Affairs that they can pay X amount to the person.
Got it.
And they are willing to sponsor that person for the minimum period of the visa duration as well.
Okay.
So these are certain things that I would focus on when I am talking to an employer or a candidate.
Okay. And what are some of the reasons why these employer-sponsored visas can be rejected?
Now, in terms of documentation, generally in terms of the process, first comes the sponsorship application for the employer. Second comes the nomination, and then it comes the visa stage. Now you have to be very careful when you're preparing your documentation for employer nomination schemes, because we have seen for small mistakes or small errors, the nomination can be rejected. So for an example, if the advertisement or if the recruitment activities have shown the salary of the particular position will be between the range of $73,000 and $75,000. But when the employment contract was made, the contract was made for $76,000.
Okay.
For a small amount as well, the nomination can be rejected. Or the position description is not matching the nominated occupation. So as you know that there is a skill occupation list. Each and every occupation has an NZESCO code. So your job description, which is given to you on the position or on the contract, has to meet that nominated occupation. So if there are small things which are not meeting the NZESCO code as well, because of job description discrepancy as well, we have seen the nominated occupation to be rejected. Your trading name, employer's trading name, and the registered business has some discrepancy. Your ABN has a different name, your ACN has a different name. So while doing the documentation, you have to be very careful. The due diligence is required. Sometimes the candidates are like, okay, it's a normal sponsorship or a nomination application, we'll do that ourselves. Or the employers are like, okay, we have people in the company who can basically do this application. So I would advise always to check multiple times before you're submitting the application. The information that you're giving to the department, it has to be very accurate and it has to be precise. Due diligence is needed because the department is carefully checking all these applications, and even for small errors, your nomination application can be rejected. You're paying a SAF levy. So basically there is a government charge as well that you're paying to the government to nominate a certain person. So there have been financial losses as well to the companies just because of small mistakes.
Okay. Awesome. And we're just coming towards the end of the podcast and I want to get into cost. So if a company is sponsoring a candidate, who bears the cost?
Now, in terms of the cost, there are certain elements of the employer nominated visas. Now, the sponsorship application has to be taken care by the employer, obviously. The nomination application, the nomination fee that goes to Department of Home Affairs. There is a SAF levy, there is a government levy charge which goes to the department. Now, these are certain costs that have to be incurred by the employer. And the visa application charges can be incurred by the applicant. It depends on the situation, but there are some differences in terms of the visa application charge, the nomination charges, and the sponsorship charges. So we clearly outline when I'm talking to an employer or when I'm talking to a candidate, I give them the detail about what are the charges that have to be incurred by the employer and what are the charges that have to be incurred by the candidate. Now there are some professional fees as well, the consulting fees, the migration lawyer fees. That is basically dependent on the candidate and the employer. They have the terms. So it depends on the circumstances as well. But we clearly outline all the expenses which have to be incurred by the employer and the expenses that have to be incurred by the candidate.
Awesome, dude. This was such a snapshot of the whole employer-sponsored visa. You explained it really well. I'm sure you guys would have got a lot of value out of this. Again, if you guys have any questions, write down in the comment section and obviously share this video with people so that they can find the right information. If people want to reach Studynash, how do they do that?
So we are basically available through our social media channels. You can reach out to Studynash through the Instagram handle. We leave a link for the respective form as well. If you're looking to get more information about the employer nominated visas, or even if you're looking to get in touch with me for the general skill migration, you can definitely just fill out that form and our team will get in touch with you.
Perfect. What I'll do is I'll pin the comment with the link of the form so you can fill up the form and reach out to Studynash. Thanks for doing this, dude.
Thank you for inviting me for this. It was really interesting.